1 minute ago, word began spreading across Montana's rugged wilderness that something horrifying was found deep inside Rich Lewis's mountain barn. For years, the legendary tracker and former star of mountain men had vanished from the public eye, retreating into the high country where few dared to follow. Locals assumed he was still living his quiet, solitary life, surrounded by snow, silence, and the wild creatures he respected more than people. But when a group of investigators finally entered his long-abandoned barn, what they discovered left even the toughest among them shaken. It wasn't just another hunting cabin filled with tools and traps. What they found inside revealed a dark, disturbing side to the man everyone thought they knew. The details are still coming out, but one thing is certain: this discovery changes everything we thought we understood about Rich Lewis's final years. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe and stay tuned, because what you're about to hear next will make you question what really happened to the lion hunter of Ruby Valley. Before the world met Rich Lewis through the reality show Mountain Men, locals in Montana already whispered his name like a myth. Long before cameras ever found him, he was the man who roamed the Ruby Valley with nothing but a rifle, a pack of loyal hounds, and nerves of steel. Rich wasn't just surviving out there, he was thriving in a way few could. He built his own cabin, tracked predators that wiped out ranchers' livestock, and often went months without seeing another human being. To him, the wilderness wasn't danger, it was home. He had a deep respect for nature's brutality and balance, believing that every creature had its place. People described him as quiet but commanding, a man whose eyes seemed to see things others couldn't. When mountain men came calling, they didn't find a TV star waiting for fame. They found a mountain soul, raw and untamed. His appearances on the show quickly made him a fan favorite. Viewers admired his calm under pressure and his fearless approach to predators. But after a few seasons, Rich disappeared from the screen without warning. He simply faded away. Fans assumed he'd grown tired of the spotlight. Those who knew him best, however, noticed subtle changes before his exit. Friends recalled that he spoke less about hunting and more about things that shouldn't be there. One even remembered him saying he'd found tracks too large and too deep to belong to any mountain lion. He kept to himself after that, venturing farther into the wilderness and rarely coming to town for supplies. Then came the silence. No one saw him for months. Mail piled up outside the small post office. His old hunting buddies stopped hearing from him altogether. At first, people chalked it up to his usual isolation. Rich had always been a loner, but eventually, even his closest neighbors began to worry. The man who had once tracked down killers of livestock and predators in the hills was now the one no one could find. As winter crept into Ruby Valley, the mountains swallowed everything in white silence. And so did Rich Lewis. For months, no one heard a word from him. The man who once tracked predators through blizzards seemed to have vanished without a trace. It started with a delivery driver who noticed something odd. Rich's mailbox overflowing with unopened letters, some dating back weeks. When a neighbor rode out to check on him, his dogs were nowhere to be seen, their kennels empty and covered in snow. His cabin looked untouched, windows frosted over, and a thin layer of dust coated the porch. Inside, the firewood pile was full, the stove cold, and a pot still sat on the counter, as if he'd stepped outside mid-meal and never came back. That same neighbor, uneasy, reported it to the county sheriff. Within days, deputies and park rangers were combing through the wilderness, guided by the same tracking skills Rich had once taught them. But no fresh tracks led away from the property. Only old, wind-swept prints that disappeared beyond the barn. His truck sat parked near the shed, keys still dangling from the ignition, its tires half buried in ice. Search teams expanded their radius, calling his name, checking hunting trails, and scanning cliff sides. Nothing. Even the dogs trained to follow his scent came up empty, circling back to the same spot behind the barn each time. The official report listed him as missing, presumed lost to wilderness exposure. Yet, those who truly knew Rich didn't buy that explanation. They said he knew every inch of that land. He could find his way home blindfolded. Something else had happened that night, something the forest had swallowed whole. Rumors began to swirl in town. Talk of strange sounds in the valley, deep growls echoing through the canyons, and flashes of movement near the tree line. It was as if the wilderness itself didn't want him found. Weeks after Rich's disappearance, when hope was nearly gone, the sheriff's office decided to take a closer look at his property. The barn, an aging wooden structure hidden behind rows of pine and half buried under snow, had always been locked tight. Even when friends visited years before, Rich never allowed anyone inside. He'd often say, "A man's barn is his mind. Some doors aren't meant to be opened." But now, with the man missing and no signs of life, deputies had no choice. They cut through the thick chain securing the door, unaware of what they were about to uncover. As the hinges groaned open, the smell hit them first. A damp, earthy odor mixed with decay. Dust hung heavy in the air. A flashlight beam swept across the space, revealing hunting gear, traps, and tools. But also something far stranger. Along one wall, bones were suspended from strings, hundreds of them, organized in patterns that seemed too deliberate to be random. Elk skulls were stacked in corners, their antlers tangled like a crown of thorns. Mounted hides, half-tanned and curling at the edges, covered the rafters. And then there were the jars, dozens of them, lined neatly on shelves, each filled with preserved animal parts, suspended in murky liquid. At first glance, it looked like a macabre collection of hunting trophies, but the arrangement felt almost ceremonial, as if each item had a purpose. The deeper they went, the more uneasy the men became. Every creak of the floorboards echoed like a whisper. Then one deputy's light caught something massive in the center of the barn, a large crate sealed with thick chains and iron latches. The box stood nearly waist-high, its surface carved with markings that no one could recognize. "What the hell was he hiding?" one of them muttered. The sheriff, pale and tense, ordered them to stand back while he examined the locks. It took almost 20 minutes to break them, and when the lid finally cracked open, every man in the room took a step back. What lay inside would turn Rich Lewis's disappearance from a mystery into something far darker than anyone expected. The moment the lid creaked open, the barn filled with a stench so foul that even the sheriff gagged and stumbled back. Inside the crate were layers of animal hides, stiff and blackened with age, stacked like parchment. Beneath them were jars sealed with wax, each containing something grotesque. Claws, teeth, eyes floating in cloudy liquid, even pieces of fur stitched together with fishing wire. One deputy whispered that it looked like a ritual site, but the sheriff silenced him. At the very bottom of the crate lay a leather-bound notebook, wrapped in an oilcloth and tied shut with a bootlace. The sheriff hesitated before opening it. The first pages seemed harmless, entries about trapping routes, weather patterns, and food storage, but as the pages turned, Rich's handwriting grew jagged and desperate. He wrote about nights when he couldn't sleep because of the noises beyond the ridge, of finding tracks in the snow that didn't match any animal he'd ever hunted. "Too big for a wolf," one line read. "Too heavy for a bear. Walks on two legs when it thinks you're not looking." He described mutilated livestock, carcasses drained of blood, and a presence that made his dogs howl until dawn. The deeper they read, the more disturbing it became. Rich had been documenting something he couldn't explain, something he claimed was watching him. His last entries hinted that he'd tried to trap it. He wrote of building reinforced cages, setting cameras, and preparing the bait. That final page was stained dark, as if by old blood, and ended with chilling words. "If I fail, it will come for the barn." The sheriff closed the book slowly, a cold sweat running down his neck. Whatever Rich had been chasing, it wasn't just an ordinary predator, and if his notes were true, it had been right there, circling his property, waiting for him to make a mistake. That night, as deputies sealed the barn and radioed for backup, one of them swore he saw movement at the tree line, something tall, silent, and gone in an instant. When investigators returned the next morning, They brought specialized wildlife officers and forensic experts. The barn was now treated as a crime scene, not just the home of a missing man. As the team combed through the piles of tools and notes, one deputy noticed a set of cables running under the floorboards. They led to an old generator and a rusted metal cabinet containing several dusty trail cameras. The memory cards were still inside. Once plugged into a laptop, the footage that appeared sent chills through everyone in the room. The first few videos were ordinary, clips of elk passing by, coyotes circling carcasses, but then, around midnight on multiple dates, something strange appeared. A shadow, tall and distorted, moved between the trees behind Rich's cabin. At first, it looked like a trick of the light, but then the outline became clear. Broad shoulders, long limbs, and eyes that reflected the camera's infrared light like glowing coals. The figure lingered, unmoving, as if staring directly at the camera. In one clip, it leaned forward, revealing an unnatural stillness, as though studying the lens itself. The last few seconds before each clip ended always showed the same thing: static, followed by the sound of deep, heavy breathing. Wildlife experts dismissed the footage as corrupted data, insisting it was likely a bear or moose caught at a bad angle. But the timestamps told a different story. The same creature appeared on multiple nights, always between 2 and 3 a.m., always in the same direction, the woods behind the barn. Even stranger, on the final video, Rich himself appeared briefly, walking into frame with a flashlight. He looked thinner, anxious, constantly glancing over his shoulder. He set a bait trap and looked into the camera for a moment, whispering something the audio barely caught. "It's not an animal." The footage cut out seconds later. That was the last recorded moment of Rich Lewis ever seen. Investigators were divided. Some believed Rich had become paranoid, driven by isolation and fear. Others quietly admitted that the evidence felt too deliberate, too real to ignore. Whatever had stalked those hills had been there long before the cameras, and maybe, just maybe, it still was. After analyzing the footage and reviewing Rich's journal, investigators attempted to reconstruct his final days. According to the dates on his last entries, everything unraveled over the course of a single haunting week. The first signs were small: dogs refusing to leave their kennels, tools scattered outside as if dropped in a hurry, and notes scrawled on scraps of paper warning, "Don't go out after dark." Neighbors later recalled seeing strange lights flickering in the tree line near his property, pale blue flashes that appeared and vanished without sound. The night before his disappearance, one local rancher claimed he heard gunfire echoing from Rich's Ridge, followed by a long, piercing howl that no one could identify. When dawn came, smoke rose briefly from the barn's chimney, then nothing. Inside Rich's cabin, the sheriff's team found food half prepared on the counter, a cup of coffee gone cold, and the last journal page open on the table. The writing was frantic, uneven. "It's closer now. The dogs won't go near the barn. I saw it watching me through the slats. If I don't make it back, someone tell the truth." It was dated 3 days before he vanished. Outside, a single boot print was discovered leading away from the cabin door toward the barn, but there were no returning steps. The snow beyond that point was disturbed only by what looked like drag marks, faint and circular, stretching toward the edge of the woods before fading. Even the dogs that once guarded his property had disappeared completely. No tracks, no signs of struggle, as if the forest had swallowed them whole. Rangers searched the surrounding area for miles, finding nothing except strange, claw-like impressions in the frozen soil. Their shape didn't match any known animal in Montana. Weeks later, hikers claimed to hear distant howls in the valley, a deep, resonant sound that carried for miles before fading into the cold wind. Some dismissed it as wolves. Others, remembering Rich's warning, said it sounded like something else, something that was never meant to exist in those mountains. When news of the investigation broke, Rich Lewis's family, who had remained silent for years, finally stepped forward to address the growing rumors. His wife, Diane, looked weary when she appeared before reporters, clutching a folded piece of paper in her hands. Her voice trembled as she explained that the barn had always been Rich's private place, and that even she had been forbidden from entering it. He said it was safer that way, she recalled. I thought he meant for the animals or the traps, but now I'm not so sure. She revealed that in the months leading up to his disappearance, Rich had grown distant, obsessed even, with something he called the Watcher. He had told her it wasn't a man or beast, but something between, and that it had been following him for years. He said he'd seen it watching from the tree line, and that it wasn't afraid of him anymore, she said quietly. Their son, Jesse, then stepped up and added something even more disturbing. He admitted that when they first entered the cabin after Rich went missing, they discovered a sealed envelope hidden beneath a floorboard. The letter inside was addressed to him, written in his father's rough handwriting. It read, "If you're reading this, it means I couldn't stop it. Don't go into the barn. Don't open the box. Burn everything." But the authorities had already opened the crate by the time the family read the letter. Diane said she felt a chill when she heard what was found inside. He told me once that if the forest ever went silent, it meant it was near. That's when you leave everything and go, she whispered. She then admitted that their family had experienced strange disturbances even before the show. Missing animals, unexplainable noises, and what Rich called signs of intrusion in the woods behind their old homestead. But Rich believed whatever it was had followed him to Ruby Valley. The family's statement was meant to quiet speculation, but it only deepened the mystery. Some locals came forward afterward, claiming that they'd seen military vehicles near the property days before the barn was sealed off. Others insisted the family was pressured to stay silent about what they truly found. Jesse, however, later posted a message online saying that he had no interest in reopening the investigation. "My dad gave his life to those mountains," he wrote. "He wasn't crazy. He just saw what the rest of us refused to believe." Despite warnings, the barn still stands untouched, its windows boarded, its doors chained again by order of the county. Locals say it's now eerily quiet in the valley where Rich once hunted. No birds, no howls, just wind sweeping through the pines. Every now and then, hikers report feeling watched near the property, describing a strange heaviness in the air, as if the forest itself remembers. And for those who knew him, one question still echoes through those mountains. If Rich Lewis truly uncovered something beyond understanding, what exactly did he die protecting us from? To this day, what really happened in Rich Lewis's mountain barn remains one of the most chilling mysteries in Montana's history. The official report lists his case as unresolved, but that hasn't stopped the theories from spreading. Some believe the evidence left behind points to a hidden predator species, something unrecorded by science, a mutation or remnant from a forgotten age. They cite the size of the tracks, the sounds caught on camera, and the strange mutilations of livestock across the Ruby Valley that continued even after Rich vanished. Wildlife biologists tried to explain it away as cougars, bears, or even wolves, but none of those explanations fit perfectly. Others think Rich's mind simply fractured after years of isolation. They say the solitude of mountain life, the endless winters, and the pressure of being a local legend slowly drove him to paranoia. To them, the bones in the barn were not proof of a monster, but symbols of a man wrestling with his own demons. Yet, those who truly knew Rich push back on that theory. They describe a man deeply connected to reality, a man who trusted nature's balance and knew fear only when it was earned. He wasn't the type to scare easy. One old friend said, if Rich was afraid, then something out there was worth fearing. There's also a darker theory whispered among former crew members of Mountain Men. According to a few who stayed in touch, Rich once mentioned off-camera that he'd filmed something the show refused to air, a segment where he tracked a creature unlike anything he'd ever encountered. Some claim he still had those tapes locked in his barn long after he left television. If that's true, they may have been among the footage confiscated when investigators sealed the property. The county denies any such evidence exists, but locals swear they saw government vehicles removing boxes the night after the discovery. Whether those boxes contained the missing tapes, Rich's journals, or something else entirely, No one knows. In the years since, the area surrounding his land has become something of a forbidden zone. Ranchers avoid grazing nearby. Hunters report that animals steer clear of the valley, as if sensing something unnatural. Even the air, they say, feels heavier there. One ranger, speaking anonymously, claimed that during a survey he found a collapsed trap built from reinforced steel, far too large for any normal predator. The metal bars were twisted outward, as if something had forced its way free. He never filed a report, fearing ridicule, but the memory of it still haunted him. Rich Lewis's legacy now walks the line between man and myth. Some remember him as a fearless tracker, others as a tragic warning of what isolation can do to the human mind. But among those who live near Ruby Valley, the story takes on a different tone. They say that on certain nights, when the fog rolls in thick, you can still hear the faint barking of dogs echoing from the ridge, the same hounds that once guarded Rich's home. Then, just before dawn, the barking stops, replaced by a low growl that ripples through the trees and fades into silence. Whether what they found in that barn was the product of obsession, fear, or something that truly defied explanation, one truth remains unshaken. Rich Lewis lived and died by the wilderness. He was a man who respected its mysteries until the very end. And maybe that's what makes his story so haunting. Because if even a man like Rich, who mastered the wild, could vanish into it without a trace, then perhaps there really are things in those mountains that we're not meant to find.